Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, September 20th, 2023. We're getting almost to that time when we have the 223s to announce. Very exciting. Don't know that it'll help you a great deal in the lottery. If you're playing a lottery that has 23 in it, you're going to need another couple of numbers. So, well, here's 5, as a matter of fact. You could throw 5 in there. That might help you. Save that one. You'll see it again as Justice gives us the thumbs up that everything is 5 by 5. What radio lingo? You can always go with 5, and you can do that in the old pick 3 days, too. All right, well, anyway, let's see. I'm not any kind of lottery expert, but we almost won the lottery today, as it turns out. Let's see. This morning, word comes that I guess Donald Trump Jr.'s Twitter account was hacked, and somebody, very cleverly used it to tell everybody that Donald Trump, the regular one, the big orange one, was dead, which might have been a fantastic way to start your day if you believed it, but as it turns out, not so much. No such luck, I guess, and so he was hacked. And that's extraordinary news. Mighty OCD would like to know what about the Orthodox lottery? Oh, that's a good question. Tomorrow, I guess bet on those numbers tomorrow, but it feels like everybody will have that information by then. Anyway, let's see. You know what? Speaking of orthodoxy and using the old Eastern Orthodox joke about everything, and one day I'm sure the Eastern Orthodox will come for me and say, all of this has been at our expense all of these years. Although, the good news is they say, well, we're going to execute you at dawn, but it's the next day, so it doesn't even matter. Anyway, it gives me it's perpetually giving me a reprieve until the next day. But today's Eastern Orthodoxy joke. Yesterday was Talk Like a Pirate Day. I just didn't feel up to it. And I guess the mistake was I didn't drink rum all day during the show. Or at least for the first 2 hours of the day. I mean, it's in poor taste, generally speaking, but I thought maybe that would encourage me. So today, I'll be drinking rum all day. Not really, but Greg Dworkin didn't get a chance to do his Talking Like a Pirate. I don't remember him being a huge enthusiast of this, but he always enjoys the day. But yesterday was a Tuesday, and he wasn't with us, so we'll extend it in Eastern Orthodox Talk Like a Pirate Day. There were probably plenty of Eastern Orthodox pirates out there. And that could be the topic of the day, as a matter of fact. In passing, I mentioned yesterday we were talking about the Canadian story of the day yesterday. Yeah, and now I'm making promises like I'm going to deliver a Canadian story a day, which I'm not, unless the Canadians would like to contribute one. But yesterday's story about the, what shall we call it, diplomatic impasse, perhaps, between India and Canada over, a murder, an assassination on Canadian soil of a Canadian citizen Sikh activist, and that confluence with Talk Like a Pirate Day. Naturally, you're going to come to the conclusion that what you should be talking about is, does Canada have a history of piracy? And I wondered why it was that piracy, through the movies is always associated with warm water ports and Caribbean piracy, etc. But basically, anywhere there are large expanses of territory where someone can be isolated and held helpless, there will be piracy. And that's usually large bodies of water. And as it turns out, I learned a great deal yesterday about piracy, and a strong and robust tradition of Canadian piracy does in fact exist. In fact, one of the most powerful pirates of all time made his home base, at least for a while. They tend to move around. They're very, very nomadic, these pirates. In Newfoundland, in Harbor Grace, Newfoundland, Peter Easton, literally one of the most powerful pirates ever, routinely defeated the navies sent after him, including the British Navy, which was unusual because he was a privateer for the British. But then when they ended his letter of marque, he said, I kind of have had a good time doing this, and maybe you can stop me, maybe you can. A lot of modern reflections in today's Republican Party of Canadian pirates of yore. But anyway, Greg Dworkin is here waiting patiently to chime in piratically or not. Good morning, Greg. How are you? How
Fine.
be ye?
I'm told that the movie box office failure of Privates of Newfoundland is part of the reason why you never really hear about Peter Easton, the Scottish pirate.
Yeah. Well, it's that's where I guess probably Shivering Me Timbers came from when it was
Shivering Me Timbers. Yeah,
up
because
in Newfoundland
it's
you'll
cold.
be shivering all the time.
Pirates
I wondered
of the
about
Yukon,
that. Why are you shivering here in Bermuda? It doesn't make any sense.
Right. Pirates of Moose territory. It just, it doesn't do it the way Pirates of the Caribbean does. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I heard,
Yarr,
this is from Don Jr.'s hacked account, that Eastern Orthodox pirates had installed listening devices in your home.
Mine.
By working on the roof this week. That's what I heard.
Well, that's excellent. More listeners.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm after. So,
Right. I don't know if they're subscribers, but certainly more listeners.
Well, that's good news by itself. They used to confine themselves only to, what was it Kellyanne Conway said? Microwaves? Is that where they were hiding?
I don't know.
Yeah, well.
Between the space lasers and the microwaves, I think that, they're just going Luddite.
All right. Well, that's the place to plant them, I guess.
But, there are certainly,
birds
all joking aside, no hacking of Don Jr.'s account. There are a number of nutcases that reside within the Republican Party, so we'll talk about that a little bit. But the first thing I want to talk about, which I just found interesting, while you were looking up pirates, I was looking up special elections.
Oh, well, that's relevant. Okay.
I was also looking up the difference between a motion and a resolution, and that comes into play because of a really funny thing. Matt Gaetz is trying to let everybody know he's not really happy with Kevin McCarthy.
Sure.
Okay. So one of the ways he's doing this is he's leaving one-page copies of his resolution to vacate the chair. It's a resolution.
Yes.
Because the House does two things. It does bills like H.R. 1.
Yes.
And it does resolutions like H-Res, I don't know.
Yeah.
Give it a number.
1.
They do two things.
Works.
It's either a sense of the House, your fifis, your feelings, which is a resolution, or it's an actual bill which gets signed into law. They don't do anything else. I mean,
there's different kinds of similar things, other types of resolutions, but basically,
HJs, House joints, that sort of thing. But basically,
they're all pretty much
there's no motion to vacate. There's a resolution to vacate. And Matt Gaetz is making it known that that's how he feels because he's leaving copies of it for reporters to find in the House bathrooms. I just think this is incredibly weird.
I mean, it's a step up from writing Kevin McCarthy sucks on the bathroom wall.
Yeah, but that's, he's doing that too.
Oh.
So he's got all of that stuff. So, I mean, they're crazy people. They are absolutely crazy people. So this, reminded me that we had a couple of special elections yesterday, the results of which are actually fairly pleasing to Democrats in New Hampshire. This is New Hampshire House District R1. And in 2016, Trump won that district by 8%. In 2020, it was nearly a tie, but Trump eked out a win. And last night, a Democrat won that district by 12 points.
Wow.
That's a big swing.
And
on average, in the special elections, in the 26 some odd special elections that had taken place in 2023, remember Dobbs was 2022. So post Dobbs special elections, Democrats are taking these on average by about 6 or 7 points. And when I say on average, that includes one of the weird districts we'll get to in Connecticut. But in New Hampshire, in this special election last night, the guy who was the Republican was a preacher who said that basically God or angels or the devil or somebody told him that Trump had won the 2020 election. And this guy got clobbered.
Oh. Well,
and so, you could talk all you like about how, the polls that don't mean anything are showing that it's a very close, but when you look at the actual election results, Democrats are doing very, very well.
Well, okay.
Now, there were a couple, when I say 6 or 7% average overperformance compared to 2020, one of the weird elections took place here in Connecticut. It was House District 148, which happens to be in Stamford, and on the face of it, you look at it and scratch your head and say, what happened here? In 2016, the Democrats won the presidential election by 40%, and same as 2020, 40%. But in 2023, the margin was only 22%. So that was an 18% overperformance by Republicans in Stamford, Connecticut. And you look at it and say, gee, what happened? Well, I looked at the Stamford Advocate and found out what happened.
Oh.
What happened is the day before, there was a big snowstorm, so only 8% showed up.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It was an easy Democratic win. They weren't going to get out in the snow and go and vote. So that's what happened. So that skews the average a little bit toward the Republicans, and the Democrats are still winning.
Okay.
Now, here's another good one. And, there's always these really interesting ones. In May of 2023, New Hampshire, there was a 27% win in 2016 for the Democrat presidential race. And in 2020, there was a 27% Democratic win. So it's basically a Democratic district.
Okay.
And in 2023, the margin there was 43% for the Democrat.
Wow.
And on paper, this looks like a 16% improvement for the Democrats.
Okay.
But the backstory with that district is, number one, the reason there was a special election in May of 2023 is because the original election was a tie.
Oh.
And
that's pretty rare,
making it even more interesting, you want to guess the total number of votes in that election?
I mean,
total number for everybody, both sides?
What? 4?
211.
Okay.
You want to know
close.
why there's 400 delegates
in
the New Hampshire
that's all they had.
House of Delegates is because in New Hampshire, 211 people are called a district. In Rhode Island, it's called an extended family.
Yeah, right. It might
I'm not
be
kidding.
the numbers at a wedding or something like that.
You have weddings bigger than that.
Right. Seriously. Okay.
So, you look at it and you scratch your head and say, okay, but it mostly looks blue. The Republican overperformances toward the latter part of the year, 4%, 2.5%, happened in Democratic districts. The big Republican wins were very, very early in January in Virginia, HD 24, HD 35, along the old lines before there was a little bit of redistricting. So I don't know what that means these days, but on the whole, you have to be pretty pleased with Democratic performance over the course of the year. And that's yet another different reason to take these polls with a grain of salt.
All right.
But interesting backstories to some of those.
Yeah, to say the least. So what was it? Was it 211 total votes, or was it 211 to 211?
It was like 153 to 50, something like that.
Man. All right. Well,
so it wasn't all that close, but it's wow. I mean, there's not a lot of people that make up a district. So daily coast elections, and I called it straight ticket. It's actually split ticket, the exact opposite. Lakeisha Jane's new shop that looks at predictions. He's predicting, actually, if the election were held today, which it's not, that the Democrats would do fine in the House, in the sense that there's like 22 too close to calls. But if you look at the districts that have already, leaned one way or the other, Democrats have the majority of them, by a little bit. So things are looking okay for 2022 at this particular point in time. And part of the reason things are looking okay is because the Republicans are crazy. So let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the big stories, is this whole thing about Kevin McCarthy being in trouble. I guess Punchbowl has the quickest, easiest summary, quick recap, they call it. Yesterday, House Republicans are forced to pull a plug on a procedural vote for a 30-day stopgap funding measure to keep the federal government open past September 30th because they didn't have the votes.
That's the reason you don't, you pull something from the floor.
Just hours later, the Republican leadership suffered another embarrassing defeat on the floor when 5 conservative GOP lawmakers crossed the aisle to vote with Democrats to bring down the rule for the Pentagon spending bill. So one of them, they knew they didn't have the vote for the CR, the continuing resolution, so they pulled it. And then they put a rule up on the floor to the rule, of course, your listeners will remember. I'm talking to myself to make sure I remember that the rule is there to really define the rules of debate, how many amendments you can have, how long the discussion goes, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually party line procedure. There's not much controversy to it. However, back in the day, when Kevin McCarthy was desperate to become Speaker and gave away the House to do that, literally, and I said that, and we said that at the time, what he just did is going to destroy his speakership because what he did is give away what's known as the Speaker's Committee, the Rules Committee. Mm-hmm. The Rules Committee determines the rules on the floor, what gets to the floor and how. And he, instead of keeping control, gave it away to the radicals, and that was going to come back to haunt them, and yesterday is the day it did. So he couldn't even get this rule passed. 5 conservative GOP lawmakers crossed the aisle to vote with Democrats to bring down the rule. One of the people crossing was Ken Buck, who just the other day had this essay in, I guess, the Washington Post, an editorial about how this impeachment drive by the Republicans is just ridiculous and embarrassing. Yes. So I guess he had to prove his bona fides and therefore voted to bring the rule down. And that just never happened. It just never happened. It happened.
Oh, well, yeah, it's pretty rare to lose a rule vote because they'll ordinarily do a whip count and figure it out beforehand if there's a problem. And there rarely is. But yeah, with a razor thin margin, we did, I guess, anticipate this problem happening to them with some frequency, whether there were serious objections to the rule or just people wanting to signal that
some
they weren't on board.
Some frequency, meaning if it happens at all, it's remarkable.
Yes, that's true. Rules, by the way, are resolutions, just in case anybody cared to figure that out. But true, and you have the definition right, of course. They only apply to the debate for a particular bill. They're not the same as the standing rules, which they tend to capitalize in order to differentiate between them, and they rule for a particular bill.
So the headlines in the New York Times, for example, right-wing House Republicans derail Pentagon GOP bill rebuking McCarthy. They don't do a great job covering Biden, but this is correct.
Yeah, that's true. And you should read it alongside the Senate Republicans derailing the rest of the military with Tommy Tuberville's continued blockade.
That's the thing. Between this and the hawks in the Republican conference getting really upset about this happening because it's a military bill and blasting them, is just outlining how radical they are along with Tuberville. So, it's just a bad day for Republicans yesterday. The Washington Post headline, House flounders as GOP fails to appease hard-right members on funding. I mean, they're getting it right. Kristen Welker may have gotten the Trump interview on Sunday wrong, but it's Meet the Press. You have to expect that. Mm-hmm. If it's Sunday, they're going to get it wrong.
Yes.
It's important that the press actually cover this properly, and I think they are. Okay. Chip Roy on Hannity says Republicans are trying to figure out a top-line number that'll get to 218. And he says, and this is a quote, but look, it's an uphill climb because I do believe there are members of the Republican conference, and he says this with the scorn that is reserved only to ne'er-do-wells and dirty effing hippies. There are members of the Republican conference who are on the verge of working a deal with Democrats, he says.
Oh, my.
Liam Donovan, my favorite Republican operative, says there's no bigger betrayal than banding together with Democrats to thwart the will of the overwhelming majority of the conference.
It's weird. That used to be bipartisanship and something you would tout in your general election campaign.
Right. And Ira Goldman, one of the trio of people like Ringwis and Matt Glassman I follow to get all this procedure stuff down, says, It's not just that Chip Roy, the House Freedom Caucus's policy chair, couldn't bring along the other members for really what's essentially his deal.
Yeah.
It's how quickly the members bailed.
Well, maybe they got a note in the bathroom.
Says in answer to that, well, it's the same split as in January. That is to say, Speaker's election. Earnest ideologues on one side, nihilist trolls on the other, and, they can't get anything done between them. So that's, in fact, what's happening. So the punch bowl thing goes on to say, so here's what happens next. There's 3 general directions McCarthy can take. Normally, what you would do here is what you call the kitchen sink approach.
Okay.
You find every single objection. Remember, only 5 people voted against it, the rule.
Yeah, all right.
You find every single objection from those 5 people, and you throw it in your bill. Okay.
I'll give you something. What are you looking for?
What are you looking for? Here it is. We know it's not going to pass, but we know the whole thing wasn't going to pass anyway. It's a messaging bill. So whatever it is you want, we'll put in.
Yeah, no real risk.
Generally, that'll get you the 5 votes, and then all of a sudden, that's how you see these things saying, well, they're holding out, they're holding out, they're holding out. Oh, in the end, they voted for it.
Yeah.
That's how that usually works. Problem here is you've got people like Ralph Norman and Matt Gaetz who say, I don't really care whether the bill passes or not. I just want to screw the chair. I want to screw the speaker. So I'm voting no. I don't care what you put in it. You can put you can make it my bill. You could call it the Matt Gaetz memorial, this is how you run Congress bill, and put everything I asked for it. I'm still voting against it.
Yeah.
And when you're in a situation like that, how are you supposed to get the proper number of votes? And the answer is the only way to do that is with Democrats.
Yes, or vacancies, I suppose. You could lock him in the basement and say he's gone missing.
Right. So eventually everybody knows that's what's going to happen. And so this whole game is to decide, well, when? October 30th on an October 31st deadline sounds good to me. So you can't possibly compromise with Democrats until then. But when you do, what'll happen is you'll strip out all of the Matt Gaetz memorial, this is my bill stuff. And in order to get Democratic votes, they're going to ask that you do stuff that they want. So in the end, you're going to wind up getting something that is let's just keep the government running, plus we'll also fund Ukraine and disaster relief. The exact things that the Republicans were trying to keep out of those bills because we spend too much.
Yeah, but the usual end result of all of the jamming we love to talk about.
Right, and that's where the jamming comes in.
Okay.
And that also comes up as what if he can't pass anything at all?
Right, okay.
Well, then the government closes down and people blame Republicans. And everybody in the Republican conference knows this except for the ideologues.
Yes.
And even they know it. The ones who really don't know it are the radicals, because the ideologues and the radicals are the ones who are feuding right now.
Lauren Boebert might not know it because she doesn't know a lot.
So here's another interesting tidbit. We told you the other day on the show, this is from Messenger, but some other reporting as well. How a vote to oust McCarthy as House Speaker may play out. We would ram it up their rear ends, one McCarthy ally said. Remember, McCarthy was really brave and said he's frustrated with demands from his right flank. In an angry outburst at the conference discussion, he dared his GOP critics to trigger a vote, move the F in motion, he said, during a closed-door House Republican conference meeting Thursday.
It's not a motion.
Last week.
Okay.
We talked about that?
Right.
Okay, but what wasn't reported is that most of the people who voted against this rule, the Matt Gaetzes, the Chip Roys, they weren't there at the conference. They didn't attend.
Oh, they didn't.
They said there's no point in going. We're just going to hear garbage. So he was really tough with his allies.
Oh, well.
But he didn't say it in front of the people who needed to hear it, is my point.
Family dynamics. It's not unfamiliar.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay.
So I thought all of that was kind of interesting stuff that may or may not be picked up. You get a sense of it from the headline that right-wing radicals are frustrated because everything's falling apart. But that's the kind of falling apart we're talking about here. That's why floundering is such a good word.
Yeah.
So how do the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans deal with the fact that the House Republicans can't govern and are falling apart? Well, pick on the way John Fetterman dresses.
Oh, sure. Why not? Yeah, I've been seeing a lot about that.
They're very good at misdirecting and redirecting, and of course our ridiculous media generally falls for it. They're not falling for this one so much, but this was sort of funny. Nate Silver tweeted, "Starting a new political party for people who don't give a crap either about how John Fetterman dresses or what Lauren Boebert does in a theater." Mm-hmm. And Fetterman answered that tweet and said, "You know what? I dress like you predict." Which I thought was pretty funny.
It is. Nothing like self-deprecating humor that actually deprecates someone else.
It's my brand. It's not your brand.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
He's great on social media. So.
Yeah. Well, he's sort of, that's the shtick.
That's his
regular
thing.
guy.
That's his shtick. Exactly right.
I don't know I guess I don't really care, obviously, what how he dresses, but it is kind of weird that.
Hey, listen, Joe Manchin wears a suit and tie, and he doubled child poverty.
Yeah, right.
I'd rather have Fetterman.
I guess that's absolutely true.
It's fact.
Well,
they
changed
the child tax credit, and that doubled child poverty.
Sure, it did. We all saw it happen, and all right. I mean, it's. Dress codes are a weird thing. You shouldn't really care a great deal about them, and I don't believe anybody here does, even the people complaining about it right now. But they do change from time to time when someone eccentric comes along, but they need to make room for them. So, first it was bolo ties, then it was women's hats, and now it's, it's shorts and hoodies. The votes are the same. So.
Stupid 19th century rules sometimes need changing.
Yeah, and, wearing a suit and tie when you don't belong in one, all it does, it serves to normalize the garbage you're up to. You might as well just let everybody see it out up front, especially if it's not garbage. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on in our second segment. Yarr and Avast yesterday. So, all right, here we are. And Greg Dworkin's still with us.
Do Southern Pirates say Yarr, y'all?
That's a good question. Yeah. I am curious about how they developed their own lingo. I imagine, do you think people from one pirate ship could talk to another? They all understood? They probably didn't even sound like this.
Well, they use flags for that.
No. Yeah, right. Signal
flags. Actually talk in person. Right. It's really hard to shout over to that other boat over there.
That's it. Maybe that's what the language sounded like. What did he say? Yarr? What is that?
To keep you, Yarr means the boat is in good shape. Arr means you're talking like a pirate.
Oh, okay. All right. Shiver me timbers and whatnot. Moving on.
This is Anna Bauer tweeting this morning, just to keep you up to date, because I have a backstory about this. Mm-hmm. Good morning from the federal courthouse in Atlanta. I'm back in federal court today as the legal teams for three of Georgia's fake electors, Kathy Latham, Sean Still, and David Schaefer, attempt to persuade a judge to move their Fulton County criminal cases to federal court. This is going to be one of the interesting ones, because basically their claim was, even though we were fake electors,
yes,
we thought we were real electors because Trump told us to, and he was president of the United States and therefore an officer of the United States, and that deputizes us.
No.
And therefore, we're going to be covered by federal rules about federal stuff taking precedent over state stuff when you're acting in your federal capacity, which we weren't. We weren't even real electors. So,
you weren't in any capacity.
I guess you could say we were fake officers of the United States, and therefore we want to move this criminal case to a fake federal court. I mean, that's the only thing I could think of that they can make an argument for.
The whole thing is so annoying as we're watching them with their independent state legislature theory and their whole theory of how elections should be conducted, that these are in control of the states. The state. Yeah, well, you're under arrest. Federal. Really? Now you're federal? You were always state operatives, and the states can do whatever they want, and the states get to run the elections, and this is a state-by-state affair. Once you're under arrest, we were hoping to get into federal court, actually.
So in a very timely piece, an exclusive in the Daily Beast, Jose Pagliari has this story, the untold story of one indicted fake Trump elector in Georgia.
Well,
and this is Kathy Latham.
Oh, okay. Well,
Before she was indicted for taking part in Trump's scheme to stay in power, Kathy Latham professed to hating politics for being a dirty business. And now, of course, she's knee-deep in the mud.
Yeah. Wow, I can't believe she's a hypocrite. That's crazy.
In the weeks before she became one of GOP's fake electors in Georgia and helped a secret MAGA team across a rural county's voting machines, local political operative Kathy Latham visited the Trump White House, snapped a picture with Sidney Powell, ran into conspiracy theorist Mike Flynn, and these details, published here for the first time, paint a broader picture of this minor character in last month's Fulton County indictment, but they also hint at her role in the wider scheme, one that could bolster the case against the former president's associates.
Yeah.
She was charged alongside former President Donald Trump and was one of the 19 people booked in jail for taking part in what the local DA claims was a mafia-like criminal enterprise. Her account offers a preview of what judges and jurors could hear in the coming months about the coordinated effort as District Attorney Fani Willis plans to put them all on trial as soon as the courts let her. Now, May 2022. Trump's already lost. Okay.
Yes, right. Okay.
And she's at her home some 200 miles southeast of Atlanta. Kathy Latham sat down with the Daily Beast for a 90-minute interview about her whirlwind of life-changing experience in the maelstrom after the 2020 election. During that interview, she lied about her role in the secretive operation to tap into her country's election equipment, a deceit we exposed at the time. Now, remember, whenever something happens, it's important that a reporter takes credit for making that thing happen.
Sure.
I discussed hurricane season, and then months later, a hurricane hit Florida, obviously due to my reporting.
Well, it's important to let people know that they've been well informed.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I don't mind. I'm just telling you, this happens all the time. So,
but which time does he expose
That's interesting. Thank you for telling me. Let's take it with a grain of salt until we see what really happened.
Okay.
Prompting a federal judge to greenlight investigative subpoenas to probe further.
Okay.
Right? According to him, their reporting prompted a federal judge to greenlight investigative subpoenas, if the feds weren't going to do it anyway.
Oh.
That's what I'm talking about here.
Yeah. Well, maybe if his article got submitted as part of the evidence.
Yeah, then you get credit. But now that she's been formally indicted alongside several of the people who took part in the mission, some of what she shared during that sit-down, and this is what is important, they did that sit-down, they did get stuff on record, and now they're going to tell us about it.
Okay.
So it now carries new significance. Latham is a career grade school teacher who takes part in shooting competitions with her .22 caliber Ruger pistol, moonlights as a copy editor, and claims to abhor traditional American politics. Politics is dirty. I get tired of the corruption. And here she is on trial for a RICO charge.
Oh, well, womp womp.
She says she's proud to do anything she could to involve herself in Trump's 2020 reelection bid.
Which is politics.
When the state's GOP chair, David Schaefer, also one of the people I mentioned who wants to move his fake elector to fake federal court, invited her to the Republican convention to be a Trump delegate. She was disappointed to decline because it cost $5,000 and she couldn't afford it.
Oh, well, that's a thing. Although that, I don't know why.
I wonder how you're going to afford your lawyer.
Well, she might not. We don't really know. But
that's why she instead jumped at the opportunity when he offered to place her on the slate of electors because there's only a $1.87 filing fee, he told her.
Yeah, you know who gets invited to be electors a lot? People who abhor politics and don't like anything about it.
So at noon on December 14, 2020, she met with the others at the state capitol in Atlanta, became one of the 16 fake electors who signed certifications. These documents were later submitted to the National Archives, cementing their place in history, but not the one she intended.
Okay.
Latham Schaefer and State Senator Sean Still were indicted last month in Fulton County and charged with impersonating a public officer, forgery, false statements, criminal attempt to file false documents. From the DA's own disclosures, the other electors flipped and began cooperating. But at her home last year, Latham wasn't ready to discuss any of that, with this reporter citing deep concerns that she might face a subpoena from the DA. Instead, she noted the way top Georgia Republicans seemed keenly interested in the happenings in her little city of Douglas, where the tiny downtown's low-lying buildings are surrounded by open farmland and the fragrance of poultry barns.
Ode to poultry barn.
Yeah, talk about a flavorful and colorful report. She recalled joining a Zoom call in December 2020, the express purpose of which was to better understand why the faraway county didn't certify a second recount. By mid-December, Coffee County, remember one of the breakfast counties, somehow made it to the short list of locations mentioned in a draft Trump presidential executive order that called for seizing voting machines. Latham told the Daily Beast she had no idea how it got there. Later that month, during the winter holidays, Latham recalled traveling to Washington for 2 days and staying at the Willard Hotel.
She hates politics a lot.
Latham said she was accompanied by Julianne Thompson, a former Georgia Republican Party spokeswoman who's married to a top GOP operative in the state. She didn't remember which days, but said it was all in her diary. Latham told the Daily Beast she stopped at the Museum of the Bible and visited the White House, where she admired Melania Trump's decorations, remembering the Christmas trees, which that year were blood-red, human-sized cones.
That's a good description, too.
But the highlight of her trip seemed to be the Trump International Hotel. So cool, she said.
Yeah.
Where she sat on the sofa having drinks with friends and ran into Sidney Powell, Mike Flynn, both of whom later came under the Fulton DA's scrutiny and became targets of her Trump coup investigation. We got yelled at because we kept leaving our masks off. By Latham's telling, it was pure happenstance akin to a celebrity sighting in her political circles. And she claimed it was the only time she ever crossed paths with Powell, despite the fact that she was technically Latham's lawyer in federal court.
I've never met this lawyer.
Right,
okay.
That's representing her. By the time they met at the Trump Hotel, they were 1 month into one of Powell's self-described Kraken lawsuits trying to overturn the 2020 election. In this case, Latham's status as a Georgia resident was used to give Powell standing to sue in that district.
Okay.
Didn't help. They dismissed their own case the day that Joe Biden was sworn in.
Okay.
Latham's willingness to take part in that lawsuit was no surprise. At the time, she was still incredibly frustrated with Georgia's handling of the election, the way it improved access to the polls during the pandemic by stretching early voting and installing more ballot drop boxes across the state. I want to make it as hard as possible. I have family members who died for the right to vote, she said, while petting her dog.
So we want to make it
hard. I love this guy. He's a great reporter.
Yeah.
Whatever, credit he wants to take for,
maybe that's just
for the hurricane, but still, this is great. I want to make it as hard as possible. Why do you want to make it as hard as possible?
Because I had family members who died for the right to vote. I guess
died suppressing it. Doesn't that mean you want to make it easier?
It doesn't say what side of the right to vote question her family members died on.
Yeah, I wonder.
Now that I think about it. Okay.
So, as Georgia was undergoing several recounts, Latham was the chair of the Republican Party in Coffee County and naturally close with several employees and elected officials at the Board of Elections, which is what made it all the more curious that she claimed to have zero knowledge about a covert mission by MAGA diehard conspiracy theorists to illegally access the district's election system computers.
To say the least. But
she stuck to that story.
There's no observation here that Latham was chair of the Republican Party in Coffee County, and it made it all the more curious because she started the story saying, I hate politics, I never want to get involved with it, and it's dirty.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't understand how that didn't get observed.
Joe Manchin said, I hate politics. Yeah. It's so dirty. I can't stand to be around politicians. That's why I'm a senator.
Maybe that's why he lives on a boat.
she stuck to that story when a regional voting rights activist named Marilyn Marks began to dig around and surmise that some kind of visit had occurred. It actually took place January 7, 2021. When asked about the coordinated visit, Latham denied knowing about it. How could somebody sneak down here? Do you know where the election board is even? It's in the middle of downtown. In other words, it's surrounded by poultry barns.
Yeah, right. So I don't know why how could anybody? I don't know. All right, whatever.
She also claimed to know nothing about Scott Hall, a bail bondsman who initially boasted about putting together the crew only to slink back in the shadows when questioned by journalists. She told the Daily Beast they'd only crossed paths once on a Zoom call, one of so many calls she couldn't remember who she spoke to, when and where and how. Mm-hmm. Okay, so text messages obtained by the Daily Beast would later show that Latham was actually in contact with Hall's team the entire time. Government surveillance footage obtained by the Washington Post would later show her greeting Hall and team at the Board of Elections office herself.
Oh.
But at her home during the interview, Latham was in denial mode. This was back in May 2022. I never heard of him. I never heard of that before I read Marilyn Marks' letters. I can't testify to that, but in reality, she'll be testifying about that.
Okay.
Last year, Latham seemed unapologetic. There's no regrets in life. Everything puts you on a journey. Be open and you don't have problems. I just try to always do what's right. Be a good American. Do what's right. That's the end of the piece. It's really a very good piece. I make fun of Jose for taking credit for everything, but that's okay. They can have stuff that other people don't have, and it puts a little color and flavor and a little eau de cologne on downtown area where the elections board is. Just think of what turkey smells like. And turkey poop, and you get an idea what's going on there. And, the whole idea that she knew nothing about it, and I'm just a poor old rural Georgian sucked into this whole thing, when in fact there's text messages and video showing that she was smack in the middle of all of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just...
As Republican county chair.
I don't like politics. I'm the county chair, and I work with the elections board, and I get invited to the White House, and I'm an elector, and oh my goodness, I just hate this politics. And I don't know nothing
about politics,
Yeah, right. This is, fairly amazing, except...
I'm just a good old county, local official.
It's a feel-good story.
Caught up in a bigger picture.
I feel really good about putting her in jail.
So, again, she's one of the three fake electors who's trying to get her trial moved to federal court because she's been deputized by people she doesn't even know.
Right, and hates because they're politicians.
Exactly. So, you scratch your head and say, I get what's going on here. I'm sure she's going to leave, but it's so frustrating that they're even making the case because in this day and age, you can never assume anything about the courts and what they're going to decide. Mm-hmm. But she's probably going to lose this one.
I hope so. We just have to spend more on education for these people. It's unbelievable.
I think so.
Well.
Start with It's Just a Bill and learn a little bit more about how the government works, would you?
Yeah. Well, they wanted to cut all the school budgets, and now they're so ignorant they're getting put in jail, and it's bad news.
Oh, I don't have this listed here. I mean, it was just, again, this is a firehouse of news some days. But speaking of legal stuff, we should talk about the fact that Trump's personal secretary apparently went rogue and has flipped and is talking to the feds and has talked to the Fed, not in the January 6th case, not in the Georgia cases we were just talking about, but rather in the Florida case of classified documents, where she says that she was the one that took pictures of all the boxes, told the feds that. She felt uncomfortable about how Trump was handling the classified stuff. So as personal secretary, she quit and then told the feds everything she knew. Awesome. And says that Trump used to hand her written notes with instructions on the back of classified documents.
Yes.
And then specifically told her, you don't know anything about those boxes.
You don't know anything about it. I like that. I was waiting for this story so we could discuss it. He actually took notes literally on the evidence of a criminal conspiracy.
Yes.
That's amazing. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Notes on a conspiracy?
Yeah, on the back.
On, I mean...
I turned it over and wrote the note documents. On it. So that sounds like fun. I mean, yes, I did see this story yesterday, and it shows remarkable, disdain for everything, not just the law of how to deal with classified information, but just, again, that he's handing this stuff out to people that, may or may not have any clearance whatsoever, but also taking things that belong in the National Archives and, making paper airplanes out of them, chewing them up, flushing them down the toilet, writing notes on it. Get me more
Complete
Diet
contempt
Coke is going to be on it.
For the rule of law, for any sort of precedent, for rules of any kind. Yes, that's what's so frustrating about him and our political press.
We don't like him.
Again, that's another story. The Kristen Welkers of the world treat him as, well, he's obviously really doing well in the Republican primary. Therefore, we have to treat him with the respect that a Republican nominee to be a leading nominee should deserve. No, you don't. This is a guy who trashes everything, including the rules, including your rules.
Yes. And good luck not getting killed in the press pens this year around. So it'll be your own doing.
So since we're talking about that, bunch of stories since. I still haven't seen the ratings. I don't think it matters. CNN did well, and then basically their reputation got trashed when they did the Trump town hall, including internally. I expect the same with NBC. Okay. I expect them to get a bump in the ratings because people tuned in to see what the hell was going on. And I expect it to really trash their reputation as well. Here's Oliver Darcy, works for a competitor, CNN, but starts the day here with new Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker fails to meet the moment as Trump unleashes flurry of lies in debut interview. There's all sorts of other pieces about how Welker failed. We covered some of those. I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time on it, but I will say that her fellow critics, that is to say, reporters willing to be critical of fellow reporters, pretty much panned her performance and said it was pretty much a disaster, just the way they did with the CNN town hall. And the only people defending her were NBC and MSNBC employees.
Oh, okay, well.
Which is expected.
I guess so.
So Mike Tomasky has an interesting piece in the New Republican TNR.
Okay.
And it says, we have two medias in this country, and they're going to elect Donald Trump. I don't think they are, but I get his point. If the press doesn't get involved in the civic health of the nation, there may not be a nation in which a free press might reside. I won't go that far, but I will say it is annoying watching how the press covers him. It's often asked in my circles, why isn't Joe Biden getting more credit for his accomplishments? As with anything, there's no single reason. Inflation, his age. People aren't quite yet seeing the infrastructure improvements or the lower prescription drug costs. But even though there's no one reason, there is one overwhelming factor, and that's the media. Or rather, the two medias. It's very important that people understand this, he writes. We reside in a media environment that promotes, whether it intends to or not, right-wing authoritarian spectacle. Yes. At the same time as a culture, it's consistently obsessed with who won the day, while I blame Chuck Todd for that, while placing far less value, or Crystalism before him. They're cut from the same cloth. And by the way, both of them don't work in their media jobs anymore.
Oh, well,
so Elizabeth's a professor, and God knows what Chuck Todd is doing. While placing far less value on the fact that the civic and democratic health of the country is nurtured through practices such as deliberation, compromise, and sober governance, the result is bad for Biden, but it's potentially tragic for democracy. Let me begin by discussing these two medias. The first, of course, is what we call mainstream: New York Times, Washington Post, non-Fox News networks, a handful of other newspapers and magazines, the agenda-setting media, as it used to be known. Mm-hmm. Whatever was the lead story in the New York Times that day filtered down. Then there's an avowedly right-wing propaganda network. This got cranked up in the 70s, but in the 80s, Sun Myung Moon started the Washington Times. In the 1990s, right-wing talk radio exploded. And back then, even with the launch of Fox, the mainstream media was much larger and more influential. Today, they're about the same size. In fact, the right-wing media might even be bigger. Mainstream media, we went over the places you never heard of the other day on Monday when we were talking about, how right-wing media gets its message out. Mainstream media audiences and newsrooms have shrunk. So the right-wing media today is, I'd argue, at least equal in size. But the more important point, the right-wing media has more power to set the news agenda, and it's vital to understand this and why. The The success of the right-wing media is by and large due to the way they speak in lockstep, one voice, and the way they push one very partisan agenda. They promote Republicans and conservatives. They say nothing good ever about Democrats or liberals. Their guiding ethos is not journalism but political, to advance one party. Mm-hmm. And everything to do with fomenting culture war, no matter how trivial. You'll recognize this phrase, he's that old. The right-wing Wurlitzer is adept at ginning up a good 2-minute hate against something that got tweeted or what Mr. Potato Head is wearing that week.
Hey, literally about what's being worn now.
The mainstream media, in contrast, doesn't speak with one partisan voice. They speak in many voices. Their guiding ethos isn't political, but journalism. Sure, they're liberal in two senses. Their editorial pages typically endorse Democrats, and they're culturally liberal because they're mostly based in big cities, and the staffs include lots of LGBTQ people and few evangelical Christians. But even with all of that, the mainstream media don't serve a transparent political agenda. And so if the New York Times or MSNBC gets a scoop about serious corruption in the Biden administration, they pursue the lead and the verified report it. If Fox got a scoop about Donald Trump, then good luck getting it on the air. They're going to talk about Mr. Potato Head.
True. By and large, yes.
Right? And in the mainstream media, does Biden get credit? Yeah, Biden's get credit for things, but the mainstream media doesn't speak with one voice. So to the loud and bumptious anti-Biden chorus that blames him for everything bad, there's no equally loud and bumptious pro-Biden answering chorus speaking as one and giving him credit for everything good. And that's why today the right-wing media has become the agenda-setting media. They set the political agenda because on core issues, it's one voice. Mm-hmm. And I'm not arguing the mainstream media should speak with one voice. It should do journalism. Politico doesn't exist to provide cover for Democrats, nor should it. It and other mainstream outlets should try to treat both sides equally. I don't think they should. And he goes on to say, except when they shouldn't. There's times when it's impossible to treat both sides as equals, and the press is to get a lot better at recognizing when those moments arise. And I would argue that involves any time you're talking about what's going on in Georgia, like Kathy Latham, and any time you're covering Donald Trump. And that's why Meet the Press was just so wrong to do what they did, and CNN before it. So that leads to self-policing, overcorrecting, yada, yada, But I think his point is well taken. There's a whole media ethos out there that doesn't allow them to tell the truth. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth is Trump and his cronies tried to overthrow the United States government, and that's the predicate for anything he says from this point onward. And if you don't emphasize that, you're not doing it right.
I don't see how you can leave it out. It's a big story. People are aware of it. There's all sorts of videotapes, a couple hundred people in jail for it. There's a dozen other people who are going on trial for it, whose names you know.
Yep. Anyway, in the few minutes we have between now and the end of the hour for me, you've got another hour to go, with or without roofers.
Oh, my.
Confused automakers braced for strike at the wrong plants.
Oh.
It's a really nice story in The Intercept.
That's interesting.
By Daniel Bogus Law. That's his name.
What? Really?
Bogus Law.
You're kidding. Glitch in the Matrix.
No, this is like Rudy Giuliani's lawyer. Daniel Bogus Law is his name.
Right.
Confused automakers braced for strike at the wrong plant. Striking auto workers pulled off a major coup before their strike, baiting America's largest auto manufacturers into self-sabotage. As the UAW kept the big three automakers guessing about which strike plans, which plants they were going to strike at. I see. Because they only picked a few to start with. The car manufacturers made a failed effort to head off the effects. Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, which used to be Chrysler, stalled production and moved parts out of plants across the country, according to rank-and-file workers, self-inflicting financial damage that could have been avoided by meeting workers' demands. In the weeks leading up to the strike, a cat-and-mouse game between the UAW and the companies unfolded, a version of guerrilla warfare. Through targeted walk-offs, the union aimed to disrupt the company's operations with the fewest possible workers, which would allow the union's strike fund to last longer, essentially forcing the companies to pay workers even during the strike period. The companies, meanwhile, sought to anticipate precisely which plants would be struck and reorganize production to minimize losses. And as they used to say in the Holy Grail with Indiana Jones,
all right.
The big three guessed poorly.
Oh, yes. Right, they chose poorly.
They chose
right?
poorly.
Okay.
A spokesperson for Stellantis, which is Chrysler's parent company, said it didn't shutter any plants in anticipation of the strike and couldn't speak to component transfers, but it was aware of an equipment issue in one of our paint shops that caused some downtime. A spokesperson for GM also said the company had not taken any steps to preemptively close any of our plants. Essentially what happened here is the companies were trying to figure out which plants would go down, and they would move production from those plants to those that were going to stay up.
Right.
That way they could still make cars and make money. And in fact, what happened is the UAW apparently goaded them into moving their production to the plants that they struck.
Womp womp. Well, you know, all these workers, they talk to one another through the union. I don't know whether that was, I mean, it's a brilliant plan if it was the plan, but the plan could just as easily have been, well, when the day comes, wherever the production is, that's where we're striking.
Right. In the run-up to the strike, UAW members at auto plants from Georgia to Tennessee to Ohio took to Facebook and Twitter to share accounts of partial plant closures and faulty information from plant managers, leading to chaos on shop floors across the country.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Scott Holdison, a worker at the Ford assembly plant in Chicago, told The Intercept that company bosses seem to have no idea where plant strikes are going to take place.
That's interesting. Good work.
Yeah, so I thought that was really nice.
Good not working. I mean, really, but okay.
Yeah, good not work.
Yeah. It makes a great deal of sense. And I mean, it also makes sense for them to say, well, we know how they're going to react to getting advance information about the strike, and we could make it that much more painful and make them look foolish by putting out the wrong information and having them react to it and then striking where we may not know where the parts are going to land, but wherever they land, there's workers and we'll talk to them.
So
all right.
Tim Scott, I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but essentially said the government should do what Reagan did and, break the air traffic controllers. And David Weigel reports that Nikki Haley said on Fox, when you have a president that's constantly saying, go union, this is what you get. The unions get emboldened, then they start asking for things.
They start going. He's right. Okay.
So it's pretty clear. I mean, Trump can go talk to the striking workers as he plans to do in Michigan.
Sure, go ahead.
But the fact of the matter is the Republican Party is anti-union and Biden is pro-union. I'm just interested in Biden will actually go walk a picket line. That'd be pretty.
Yeah, we haven't seen that.
He won't cross one.
Yeah.
But I wonder if he'll walk one.
Maybe. Should be exciting and, well planned and well executed strike. So fantastic. And, all right. Thanks, Greg. We will check in with you again tomorrow. Don't be on strike if you can help it. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. You know, it occurred to me I wanted to make a point and hearken back to a story we read, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that I had been holding for 2 or 3 weeks at the time that I read it that now seems just a little bit more relevant. In the wake of the acquittal of Ken Paxton in his impeachment case in Texas, and in the wake of Greg's mention of the right-wing news ecosystem that is composed of a number of outlets about which we've heard almost nothing, with a few exceptions, but just sort of these new things that pop up. Some now are old and we're getting, we've taken notice of, OANN and Newsmax and Washington Times, and even to some extent this Post-Millennial. I had heard the name before, but there were definitely 3 or 4 others that we hadn't heard anything about. And then the story that Ken Paxton's acquittal comes after a pressure campaign, a very coordinated and intense pressure campaign on the Republican state senators in Texas, demanding that, as part of their ability to remain card-carrying members of the Republican Party, they had to vote to acquit despite the overwhelming evidence of Ken Paxton's guilt and the overwhelming vote to indict him by Republicans in the Texas House. So where did this pressure campaign come from? And I remind you that a couple weeks ago we read the story in the Texas Tribune under the headline of Gen Z influencers quietly recruited by a company with deep Gop ties rally to impeached Ken Paxton's aide. The whole story was about the use of this new version of the right-wing news ecosystem to push Gen Z influencers, I guess the successors to the Millennial Post, which I think is really talking to Gen Z people, but maybe written by millennials for Gen Z. But at any rate, just to let you know that, I think that's exactly who we're talking about there. The Gen Z influencers and the channels they were using are, in order to push for the acquittal, if not exoneration, acquittal of Ken Paxton, are the very same outlets, or at least type of outlets, that Greg was speaking about, being up and coming in their influence over the Republican base. So just a reminder that happened out there, and I'll give you a link back to it. We'll hand this one, take it out of the archives, hand it back to Scott, and give you a chance to review it. Okay, just thought I would make that connection for you. Let's see. There was the story of the fake electors. One part of the fascinating story that Greg told us was the rather more boring story, but worthy of keeping up to date on at any rate. That is covered here by the Associated Press and brought to you courtesy of the Daily Coast front page. 3 fake electors want Georgia election subversion charges against them to be moved to federal court. Again, the claim is, it was a federal election that we were interfering in, so therefore something, we should be in federal court. Their actual argument was, the guy who you say told us to do this thing, but we sometimes say told us to do it, but sometimes we deny it whenever it looks like he's going to get in trouble for it, was the President of the United States. Therefore, we were deputized as federal officers. You were not officers at all. Reminder, the charges pending against you include impersonating a federal officer, although I don't know whether it even names whether they're federal. I mean, but there's an argument to be made that what they were doing was, a federal role, electors, but of course they represent the state. So, there's all sorts of cross currents here. Not to mention, you've been protesting loudly this whole time that this ought to be regarded as a state role. And then when you get in trouble, being in federal court isn't even going to save you. You're just looking to cause problems and delay things, so you appeal to the federal courts. But no, you weren't an officer of any kind. You were impersonating them, and it's a state law that you were breaking in impersonating an officer, and that's kind of where it lands. But let's see what they have to say in the AP article. Lawyers for 3 Georgia Republicans who falsely claimed that Donald Trump won the state and they were, quote, duly elected and qualified electors, are set to argue Wednesday, that's today, that criminal charges against them should be moved from state to federal court. David Schaefer, Sean Still, and Kathy Latham were among the 18 people indicted last month, along with Trump, on charges that they participated in a wide-ranging scheme to keep the Republican president in power after his 2020 election loss to Democrat Joe Biden. All 19 defendants have pleaded not guilty. U.S. District Judge Steve Jones is set to hear arguments on Wednesday on why Schaefer, Still, and Latham believe the case against them should be tried in federal court rather than Fulton County Superior Court. Jones already rejected a similar effort from Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who has appealed that ruling. He held a hearing Monday on a similar bid by former U.S. Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark and has yet to rule in that one. But maybe he'll pull one out today. Schaefer, Still, and Latham, have all been indicted in court filings that they will not, I'm sorry, I've read it wrong. They have all indicated, it's not indicted, and take a closer look. They've all indicated in court filings that they will not be present in court for the hearing. So their case moves to the courtroom today, but they won't. If their cases are removed to federal court, a jury would be drawn from a broader and potentially less Democratic pool than Fulton County alone, and any trial would not be photographed or televised, as cameras are not allowed inside federal courtrooms. But It would not open the door for Trump if he's elected again in 2024 or another president to issue pardons, because any conviction would still happen under state law. Part of the overarching illegal scheme, the indictment alleges, was the casting of false electoral college votes at the Georgia Capitol on December 14th, 2020, and the transfer of documentation of those votes to the President of the U.S. Senate, Mike Pence, the National Archives, the Georgia Secretary of State, that's Brett Raffensperger, right? And the Chief Judge of the Federal Court in Atlanta, whose name I don't know offhand, but you could look it up. Those documents were meant to disrupt and delay the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021 in order to unlawfully change the outcome of the election, the indictment says. Prosecutors allege that Schaefer, Still, and Latham and the other Georgia Republicans who participated in that plan falsely impersonated electors. They did. The related charges against him include impersonating a public officer, forgery, false statements in writings, and attempting to file false documents. And it doesn't really matter, actually, whether they are trying to impersonate a federal officer or not. It's a state charge that's being brought against them. Surely it is also against federal law to impersonate a federal officer. It just doesn't matter. That's not what is being charged here. What's charged is the state law that prohibits impersonating an officer of any kind, federal or otherwise. So that shouldn't avail you of very much. And Judge Jones ought to dismiss this pretty quickly. They'll appeal again, but pretty much on the same grounds. Republicans in 6 other battleground states that Trump lost also did the same thing, fake electors. Michigan's Attorney General in July brought criminal charges against the fake electors there. Lawyers for the 3 contend that the legal challenge to the state's election results was pending, and that lawyers told them it was necessary to have an alternative slate of Republican electors in case the challenge was successful. They cite, and Armando told you back in late August for our birthday extravaganza, why this is of no import. Let's see if they help us out in the AP article. They cite the example of the 1960 presidential election when Republican Richard Nixon was initially certified as the winner in Hawaii. Supporters of Democrat John F. Kennedy filed a legal challenge that was still pending on the day of the state's presidential electors, that the presidential electors were set to meet that day. The certified electors for Nixon and uncertified elector nominees for Kennedy met at the state capitol to cast votes for their candidate and sent them to Congress as required by the Electoral Count Act. Kennedy ultimately won the election challenge and was certified the winner, and Congress counted the votes of the Kennedy electors. And so that's the end of the discussion. So no mention of the fact that after that debacle, at some point after 1960, they said, this was a confusing mess, and we should probably prevent such confusing messes from happening again. And Congress explicitly said, we will adopt new law that modifies the Electoral Count Act and establishes the safe harbor procedures, et cetera, among other things. And specifically, I guess, at that point, specifically forbade replicating that situation. In 1960, it wasn't explicitly against the law to collect alternative elector votes as a hedge against the outcome of the then pending litigation. Whereas post 1960, or sometime certainly between 1960 and now, it became illegal to do that. It became a part of the Electoral Count Act that they would be prohibited from doing so, and then they did it anyway, and now they point back to saying, well, they did it in 1960, and conveniently forget to point out that, yes, between 1960 and now, however, there was a decision made that that was too messy and dangerous to be permitted to happen again. And it was outlawed, and you've now done it again. It doesn't make any sense to say, well, before it was outlawed, it wasn't outlawed. That's not helpful. Also not helpful, not reminding people of exactly what that situation was in the AP article, because you depend on people like me with imperfect recall as to exactly why it does not bear any relevance to cite the Republican argument from 1960 or I guess the Democratic argument from 1960 and the Republican reliance on it post-Electoral Count Act reform. Anyway, at the time of the actions alleged in the indictment, Schaefer was the chair of the Georgia Republican Party, Latham the chair of the Coffee County Republican Party, and Still the finance chair for the state Republican Party. Still was elected to the state Senate last year and represents a district in Atlanta's suburbs. Their lawyers say their clients were acting as contingent U.S. presidential electors and in that role were acting at the direction of federal officers. No, not really. I mean, if anything, they were acting in the scope of, as I would say, as state actors. I mean, who shows up at, where do they do their voting? They're voting in a federal election as electors, yes, but electors from the state of Georgia, or rather I should say the blank of Georgia, the state of Georgia. Where do they meet? Washington, D.C.? No, state capital. Who certifies that they are who they are, and if they're real electors, who signs their paperwork? The Secretary of State in Georgia, the governor of Georgia. There's no federal officers involved, except that the federal officers involved are the recipients of their certifications. That's it. They send them to the vice president, they send it to a federal judge, et cetera, et cetera. But they also send the copy to the local Georgia Secretary of State as well. So that's not determinative all by itself. But all of what happens on December 14th happens in states and under the supervision of state officials. That they happen to be voting for federal officers. Now, it doesn't make any difference under Georgia law, certainly. And I don't know whether it's going to make any difference under federal law either, but it doesn't matter because they should never be tried under federal law, at least to the exclusion of being tried under state law anyway. I mean, if you want to also indict them under federal law and try them at that point later on, you could do that without putting them in double jeopardy, as a matter of fact. But anyway, it just doesn't make any sense, of course, what they're asking for. But they're just asking for it to delay things. That's it. Anyway, well, you know the rest of the story. But also, I think equally interesting here is the information we learned from other sources, including the Daily Beast article, that, as it turns out, Latham is also participating in a broad scheme to breach election equipment in Coffee County on top of it all, as well as also being a fake elector. So she's involved in every aspect of this scheme, as it turns out. A pretty good collar, really, then, as a co-conspirator. You were involved in more than one angle of the same conspiracy to steal the election. And we could try and steal it as fake electors, and if that doesn't work, we'll break into the voting machines and allege fraud. Okay, how you can claim to be involved, well, how it is that you end up involved in both aspects of the conspiracy and then claim not to know anybody at all involved in it. Well, we'll say strains credulity, I think, right? Okay, on to some other interesting information, including, well, let's see. Can I just stop for a second and tell you about Canadian pirates? I'm serious. There was some really interesting pirate information that I found. And I just went and I Googled like Canadian pirates, and there was an actual result. For one thing, although it listed 2 Canadian pirates, but then also pointed to this story of Peter Easton, who wasn't strictly speaking a Canadian pirate. There weren't Canadians then. At the time, it was just, of course, an overseas colony of the British / I guess still obviously some French on hand. He was an early days pirate, and I guess he was Scottish in origin. I think is what I think Greg might have mentioned. Maybe he saw the story too. But at any rate, I'll tell you what his history is, but it was really fascinating. But there's 2 people listed as Canadian pirates, according to Wikipedia, just so you know. Joseph Baker and Edward Jordan. And just out of curiosity, we can, they're sort of like latter day pirates. That is, late 1700s into the early 1800s. And that raised another question of how long did piracy go on? And of course, the answer is it's still going on in slightly different form, although there's good old-fashioned traditional pirates, of course, operating off of the coast, say, of Somalia. But that raised a bunch of weird issues, too. But at any rate, under a slightly more liberal definition, I guess, we find the story of Peter Easton, who operated out of Canada, which answered the real question of, why are we not hearing stories about pirates operating in colder waters? And the answer, as always, is multi-layered and complicated. Peter Easton is an excellent example of a story that we should have heard more about, but haven't for some reason, and I'm not certain what it is. And then, of course, well, gee whiz, why don't we hear about pirates operating in colder waters? And this is a story of perception and how things are presented in history, and sometimes the fact that since a different word is being used, and the context is slightly different for the activity that we're talking about, people get confused or learn about it in different phases of their learning about history, if they learn about history at all, and they don't connect the two. But I mean, well, what would you call somebody operating in colder waters whose MO was, yes, attacking other ships at sea, also basically coming ashore, raiding local fishing villages, doing all it's interesting and weird how when we talk about pirates and other marauders being involved in raping and pillaging, like we say it as the pillaging makes it sort of a traditionalist activity, and it's like, well, it's still raping, and it's not good. And I don't think anything about raping and pillaging is got a positive connotation, but it somehow distracts from the stark admission that a lot of the motivation here was raping. Anyway, but operating in colder waters, okay, but let's talk about a different time period. They sailed around and they used their naval power and or their maritime prowess, I guess, to impose themselves by force of arms on the locals that they attacked. Are they pirates or are they Vikings? Well, you see, the entire society was geared toward this sort of piracy. So it's not really piracy per se, in which we come to think of them in the 1700s sense of, rogue actors outside the law, as opposed to an entire society geared toward doing that. Well, it gets the official imprimatur of the local governing authorities here. So up when the people are doing it in Scandinavia, it's Viking, and if they're doing it in the Caribbean, it's piracy. Well, it's the same thing. Now, Peter Easton, an interesting example, and Scott Anderson also forwards me another one. I've seen it because I've been on the Wikipedia pages, but there's another very interesting one, and I guess a good progressive discourse on Canadian piracy would almost certainly not be able to overlook the role of women in Canadian piracy. And there's a whole article here that he points to called Canada's Pirate Queen. Pirate Maria Lindsey Cobham sent waves of fear through sailors in 1700s Canada. True. I mean, according to this story anyway, true, there exists this story, and it's not all that long, although there's a little bit of, I see here they're trying to untangle things. Is it fact or fiction? There's a little bit of myth building around all pirates. But you should definitely keep in mind that there is a, if not feminist angle, that certainly an angle about women's participation in piracy. Not that anybody really wants to claim the mantle of piracy, but, you know, it makes for an interesting story. But Peter Easton, you'd think would be more famous. Like, I guess the most famous pirates, at least among people who are actually existed at one point, let's say Blackbeard the pirate, I guess, is, I don't know why we focus so much on him, but he operated in a lot of cases in American waters, so maybe that's why he's the most famous pirate among Americans. I don't know whether English consider him among their most famous pirates or not, but yeah, he was operating in American waters, but it was English territory at the time. So anyway, Peter Easton, though, should be more famous. The Wikipedia article on this guy, he's operating much earlier. He's from about he's born in 1570, Scottish, and dies around 1620. And I guess we don't hear that much more about him, or maybe the lines are blurred on him because, of course, he, like a lot of pirates, is crossing the line back and forth between legal activity and illegal activity because of privateering, right? He would have held a letter of marque from the English government of the time to attack probably Spanish ships. But then he runs afoul of the law at some point. Now, how does it happen? If I read correctly, he's granted this commission as a privateer probably by the government of Queen Elizabeth I, which means he's probably operating with, although he's Scottish, probably operating with the Queen's favor here, perhaps as a Protestant. It's not entirely clear, but what is clear is that when James Stewart succeeds to the throne and brings a Catholic monarch back to the throne of England, he ends the program of privateering against Spanish shipping, Catholic Spain, as a gesture of goodwill, I guess, between Catholic monarchs. He tries to end the effort of privateering against the Spanish, but Peter Easton has had a tremendously successful and lucrative career doing it, and has built his forces to the point where he's able to say, maybe I'm not going to stop raiding the Spanish fleets, which puts him afoul of the law and turns him into a pirate, and the British government are now officially angry at him for doing the thing that yesterday he was a hero of Great Britain for doing. And he continues on, and he does it. And now, does this make him worried or scared? It doesn't, because of the size of the force that he's amassed along the way. And there's some complications there too. But, so he eventually says, well, what it does is it doubles the size of my targets. If I'm already an outlaw in England, I can rob English ships too, if I think that's lucrative enough. Or I can just keep targeting the Spanish, or I can move around. I can target the French. I could fight for the French. I could attack on the Barbary coast. I can, well, anyway. So as a privateer, of course, he's also, by the way, entitled to impress, that is to use press gangs to force pretty much anybody he wants, anybody he encounters, into serving in his crew. The idea usually is, captured soldiers, captured sailors from the other ships, or, for that matter, anybody that he manages to come across and can, by force of arms, persuade to join him. So that led to his, he had this remarkable ability. He built up a huge crew. At some point, according to the various articles I read about him, he's got 1,500 men under arms and, dozens of ships, captured vessels. He's got a whole armada of his own. And he, in fact, eventually turns the settlement of Harbor Grace into a fortified base. He builds his own fort. So this guy has like a fleet of 40 ships, 1,500 men under arms, a fort, cannons in the fort, cannons obviously all over his ships, when he runs afoul of British law, they come after him and he just outright defeats them. In fact, he ends up at some point later in his career, working with a local, or a prominent Cornish, family, and who I guess has found themselves in opposition to the crown for some reason at some point too. And he ends up blockading the entire Bristol Channel, effectively, as it says here, controlling the shipping entering and leaving Western English ports. I mean, he basically defeats the British Navy of the time in their own territory and blockades England. He was that powerful. It's just surprising that we've really never heard anything about this guy. And his end is as flamboyant as anything. Apparently, he ends up in the allegiance and service of the Duke of Savoy in early 1600s, around 1613, because the Duke of Savoy controls the ports of Nice and Villefranche and declares them free ports and offers asylum to pirates in exchange for, maybe some investment of the gold that they've hauled in. A very interesting relationship between him and a new government.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Coast, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, the Pirates in the Morning Show. I actually feel like I have to read quickly through the Peter Easton profile on Wikipedia because there's pieces of it that are interesting that I missed. But we'll just run it through this way. So their description of him: Peter Easton was a Scottish privateer and later pirate. They changed the designation in the early 17th century. Conflicting accounts exist, and you can see why when you read through this account. Conflicting accounts exist regarding his early life, but also his later life, I would have to say. By 1602, Easton had become a highly successful privateer commissioned to protect English interests in Newfoundland, the most famous English pirate of the day. His piracies ranged from Ireland and Guinea to Newfoundland. He's best known today for his involvement in the early English settlement of Newfoundland, including the settlements at Harbour Grace and Ferryland between 1611 and 1614. One of the most successful of all pirates. He controlled such sea power that no sovereign or state could afford to ignore him, and he was never overtaken or captured by any fleet commissioned to hunt him down. However, he is not as well known as some of the pirates of the late 17th and early 18th centuries. Now, Easton begins as a loyal servant of the crown, and his ancestors had served in the Crusades, it is said here, although there is a citation needed for that. And the Eastons also distinguished themselves against the Spanish Armada. So, a little bit of a tradition in getting into it with the Spanish. The historic Rose Manor, based in Harbour Grace, Newfoundland and Labrador, is in close proximity to the fort that once housed Peter and his crew. In 1602, Easton was in command of a convoy as a privateer with a commission from Elizabeth I of England to protect the Newfoundland fishing fleet. During these times, fishing vessels would carry arms and small cannons to protect the valuable cargo of fish from pirates and foreign vessels. Under his commission, he could legally press gang local fishermen into service for him. He could also attack the ships and wharves of the enemy as much as he wished, especially the much-hated Spanish. Easton's flagship was Happy Adventure, from which he flew the St. George's Cross at the masthead. So a pirate just basically running around flying the English flag, happily enough, as a privateer. That later changes, and then he becomes a pirate. And June 23rd, 1604, after Elizabeth I was succeeded by James I, the king sued for peace with Spain and canceled all letters of commission to privateers. On hearing the news, Easton continued his attack on vessels as though nothing had changed. In so doing, he had crossed the line into piracy. His flagship, Happy Adventure, flew the St. George's Cross and attacked Spanish ships for gold in the West Indies and the Mediterranean, while in the meantime demanding and receiving protection money from English ships. So, well, I won't steal your cargo or sink your boat, but it'd be a shame if something was to happen to it. And, I mean, he was powerful enough to just exact this tax from English ships. In 1610, he blockaded the Bristol Channel. And take a look at the map. It's not small. Effectively controlling the shipping entering and leaving the western English ports. This is an interesting position to be in, where you can basically, I guess, you stop every ship coming in and out. And you can say you got two choices. I'll kill you all, sink your ship and steal all your cargo, if you force me to do that, in which case, sure, I'm a pirate. But on the other hand, here's another choice. Why don't you just give me some portion of what you're carrying? Some percentage of what you're carrying. I'll let you go in and out, protection money, no problem. You go, but I'll just take a percentage. Think of it as customs. I'm the customs agent for all of these ports. Yeah. Think of it that way. If you don't want to pay the percentage, I kill you and take everything, and you'll say I'm a pirate, but I'll kill you before you can tell anybody. Or you could do it this way. This is a much more economical way. It's better for everybody if you just pay the import duty, even though the king will see none of it. But I don't mind that because, I don't believe this guy should be the king anyway, and I don't have any particular loyalty to him, even though I'm Scottish, which is also interesting. I don't know how his loyalties change throughout his life. So he blockades the entire Bristol Channel. Now, it says here, for the most part, he was acting on behalf of the powerful family of the Kagros from Falmouth, Cornwall. They financed his expeditions and also took shares in his profits. It'd be interesting now to read about the Kagros and their relationship with the court of King James I. I guess they were on the outs. Now, Easton arrived in the colony of Newfoundland in 1612 with 10 pirate ships and had his headquarters at Harbor Grace. He raided and plundered both English and foreign vessels and the harbors of Newfoundland, press-ganging fishermen into his service along the way. On one expedition, he plundered 30 ships in St. John's and held Sir Richard Whitbourne prisoner, releasing him. You're going to all appreciate this. This is where we come back to politics. Releasing him on the condition that Whitbourne would go to England and, by the way, run for and win a seat in Parliament, and then obtain a pardon for Easton. How do you like that? Just in terms of our current situation, and why don't I pardon everybody? Run for president, and then everything will be okay. So he captures Sir Richard Whitbourne and releases him only on the condition that he goes to England and not only finds himself elected to Parliament, but more particularly that he will seek and obtain a pardon for Easton, who is in the meantime raiding both English and Spanish shipping. The pardon, in fact, was granted. How do you like that? But it didn't even matter, because by the time it came through, Easton had moved on to the Barbary coast to harass the Spanish there. Now, while in Newfoundland, Easton is estimated to have taken as many as 1,500 fishermen for his ships, most voluntarily. Isn't that interesting? Your fishing vessel gets stopped, and he says, I'm going to press you all into service as privateers / pirates crew. And I'll put it to you this way. You can do it voluntarily, or I can take you by force. But if you come voluntarily, like you suppose maybe he offers some incentive, like you get a 5%, a share of 5% of the take. But if I have to force you, you get 2.5%. Oh, okay. Well, then I'll go voluntarily. But it's interesting. You probably, at least they probably offered him a lot more money, a lot less discipline than being either you could be impressed into the regular Royal Navy at any point, and that would definitely suck, or you could stay here as a fisherman. So voluntarily, they're seeking their fortune as pirates. So let's see. Easton continued to protect John Guy's colony. I'm not familiar with John Guy, but you can look him up here at Cooper's, Cooper's Cove, but did not allow him to establish another colony at Renews, if I am pronouncing that correctly. On one of his raids, Easton headed for the Azores, right? Stationing his fleet south and west of the islands, he planned to intercept the Spanish Silver Fleet. No details of the battle are known except for that a few days later, Easton arrived in Tunis, loaded with treasure and 4 Spanish ships in tow. Now, the last section here, retirement to Savoy. This is interesting too. So in early 1613, the Duke of Savoy issued a proclamation making Nice and Villefranche free ports and offering asylum and safe conduct to all pirates. Why would you do that? And here's the answer. Money. On February 20th, 1613, Easton sailed into Villefranche at the head of 4 ships and 900 soldiers, leaving 8 more vessels outside the Strait of Gibraltar. Easton met with, I guess in case the guy feel like lured in and captured, word will get to the 8 ships outside of the Straits of Gibraltar, come to Villefranche and bust me out of jail, I guess. But instead, the deal goes down this way. Easton met with the Duke and agreed to invest 100,000 crowns in Savoy. So you're the Duke of Savoy, you're ostensibly wealthy, you're land rich, but you need cash for whatever reason. And a pirate comes and says, "Here, what do pirates have that you need? What do we have in spades that you need? Gold, silver, money." Right? And no legitimate way to invest it or store it. We're tired of burying it and marking the spot with an X and making a treasure map and losing track of exactly where it is, or we lose the map. And you know how all of that stuff goes because you've seen the movies. Instead, you can actually come on land in a free port and invest in the venture of running Savoy. So how about that? You invest 100,000 crowns in Savoy and offer the Duke a percentage of the proceeds of his plunder in return for an annual income. William Parkhurst, an English agent in Savoy, wrote of Easton this, and it's in the archaic language here. "This Easton hath since been with me. He seemeth to have the age of 40 years. His countenance is rude and savage, which the Duke took notice of. His speech and carriage is slow, subtle, and guilty." Interesting. Easton ingratiated himself with the Duke of Savoy by taking part in a raid on the Duchy of Mantua. Easton was granted a pension of £4,000 a year and was sworn to faithful service, becoming a Catholic after long last, right? Marrying an heiress and being created a Marquis of the Duchess of Savoy. Or I suppose in Savoy you're a Marquis, rather than a Marquis, as they might say in England. A Marquis of the Duchy of Savoy. Despite this, he remained known at court as Il Corsaro Inglese, the English corsair. Within a month of Easton's arrival in Savoy, he had dismissed most of his company. Although he took part in a Savoyard naval attack on Venice later in 1613, at that point he commanded French crews and ships. The expedition was not successful, so the English pirates much better, higher quality. And after this, Easton took little part in maritime affairs. Nevertheless, he remained in the Duke's employ till at least 1620, after which point they lose track of him, either because he died or disappeared or I don't know what. But never brought to justice, just sort of invested 100,000 crowns in the the Duchy of Savoy, becomes a makeshift noble of Savoy, and retires peacefully that way. What a story. And you never hear about this guy. Maybe you have to have had a romantic death at sea in order to make the stories like Blackbeard and others. I don't know. I just found that really fascinating. The other interesting thing I found was a list of pirates in Wikipedia. I don't know on what basis, but they separated them into eras. And apparently there was a golden age of piracy and all of that stuff. But that just drove me to scroll all the way down and say, what's going on in the modern era with regard to piracy? And does every body of water that's large enough to support shipping, in fact, also support piracy? And thinking about Canada and the Canadian environs, I then stumbled across the existence of a pirate, an American pirate, who actually operated on the Great Lakes. And again, you're like, how does this pirate escape capture? It's a lake. Find him. It's not like the ocean, and you can sail in any number of different directions, but the Great Lakes are pretty great. They're pretty large. And as it turns out, this guy operated in such a way that it was kind of like, well, first of all, he operated from, what is this? Is this the date of death or the years active? Here we go. From 1900 to about 1930. And he lived until 1949. And he was a pirate on the Great Lakes. Well, what do you mean a pirate? Well, an interesting guy. Roaring Dan Seavey was his name. And maybe you've heard of him. Maybe there are songs about him for all I know. But active, as it says in brief here, as a timber pirate, a lake pirate, and known as and a Great Lakes pirate. I mean, I don't see why lake pirate is exclusive of that. But anyway, operating mostly, though, in Wisconsin and Michigan on the Great Lakes, and not active necessarily in Canada. Canada didn't worry too much about him. He was an American pirate preying on American shipping. And what an interesting article he presents in Wikipedia. Roaring Dan Seavey, a sailor, fisherman, farmer, saloon keeper, prospector, U.S. Marshal. Oh, but also thief, poacher, smuggler, hijacker, procurer, and timber pirate in Wisconsin and Michigan. What exactly is a timber pirate? Well, I mean, in some cases, I guess if you're shipping timber from one port to another, well, what if I stole it and sold it in some other port and just kept the money? Is it as simple as that? In some cases, but wait till you see what his methodology is all about. So, by the way, Seavey, born in Portland, Maine. How do you like that, Bill? Is that fun? In 1865, nothing, rough and tough going on in 1865 in the United States as far as I recall. He left home at age 13 and became a sailor for a short time, serving in the U.S. Navy. He, moved near Marinette, Wisconsin in the late 1880s. He participated in the Klondike Gold Rush, unsuccessful, ironically, can't find the gold. But then turns to piracy. So, in, what are we talking here? Escanaba. In Escanaba, where's Escanaba? Michigan. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, but he's a pirate, so I guess it doesn't matter. Seavey acquired a schooner, which he named the Wanderer, and began a career as a pirate. Who even knew that you could do that in this day and age? Seavey sailed the Wanderer as a legitimate shipping operation, but he also sailed into ports at night to steal cargo from other vessels and warehouses. Seavey also was involved in illegal prostitution trade, any way you could make money. He's a mobster, operating aboard a riverboat brothel. Seavey was notorious for wrecking by altering sea lights, either by extinguishing existing lights or placing false lights. The trick, known as moon cussing, that's a flavorful phrase for it, would cause ships to sail into rocks where Seavey's crew could easily capture the cargo from the wounded vessel. A significant portion of Seavey's profit was made from venison poaching. When a company called Booth Fisheries attempted to compete with Seavey's illegal venison trade. Seavey attacked one of its ships with a cannon, killing everyone on board. That's just some ruthless mobsterism. In the modern sense. Seavey's most infamous exploit was the hijacking of the schooner Nellie Johnson. On June 11th, 1908, Seavey came aboard in Grand Haven, Michigan, with a large amount of alcohol, which he offered to share with the crew. What a nice guy. And once they became intoxicated, Seavey tossed them overboard and sailed the Nellie Johnson to Chicago, where he attempted to sell the cargo. The United States Revenue Cutter Service. How do you like that? Did you know there was one? Soon gave chase in the Tuscarora. That's the name of the boat they used to chase him. Seavey, meanwhile, had moored the Nellie Johnson and was again sailing in the Wanderer. After several days, he was captured on June 29th, 1908, and was taken to Chicago in irons. So it sounds like the end, right? Many contemporary newspapers reported that Seavey was arrested on the charge of piracy, but he was officially charged with unauthorized removal of a vessel on which he had once been a seaman. How do you like that? The original warrant no longer exists, and the piracy charge may have been a fabrication from the Chicago Daily News in a case of yellow journalism. He was released on bond, and the charges were later dropped when the owner of the Nellie Johnson failed to appear, maybe having been chopped to pieces at some point, or threatened. Don't know. But maybe. For the rest of his life, Seavey maintained that he won the Nellie Johnson in a poker game. Wow. Hey, I'm a legitimate businessman. Now, later life and death. At the end of his career, Seavey accepted a position with the United States Marshals Service. What? Where he worked to curb poaching, smuggling, and piracy on Lake Michigan, like Frank Abagnale eventually going to work for the FBI as an anti-counterfeiting expert, right? Seavey retired in the late 1920s and settled in Peshtigo. I don't know how you pronounce Peshtigo, Wisconsin. He died at the Eklund Nursing Home in Peshtigo on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1949, at the age of 83. How do you like that? That is pretty remarkable. By the way, Seavey commemorated in modern life in the name of Roaring Dan's Rum, a maple-flavored rum produced by a Wisconsin distillery. If you'd like to hit the stores and look for the product by Great Lakes Distillery. Well, that's some story. And there are a number of modern pirates, listed here, still active, of course. And we still have that problem off of Somalia, but also just a lot of interesting modern excuses for piracy, including some places where the government is a little bit unstable. Sometimes these pirates operate and say, oh, we're the Coast Guard of Somalia, not just a bunch of pirates. Yeah, this here, in fact, the Abdul Hassan, who is the pirate who does operate off of the coast of Somalia, he leads a 350-man crew that styles itself the Central Regional Coast Guard. And I guess there's just nobody with the kind of power that can project offshore to establish themselves as the one true official Somalian Coast Guard. So he just says, that's him. It's just that they rob people more often than they save them. Is that interesting operation? I also had, my eye was caught by a pirate active in the 40s and 50s in the waters between Venezuela and Trinidad. He himself Trinidadian, but the name of the pirate in question, Boise, B-O-Y-S-I-E, Boise Singh. And I just bring up Singh because we were just talking, we got to this whole subject, just to bring things full circle. We got to this subject by speaking about the Canadian citizen Sikh activist, also, as many Sikhs are, by the going by the surname of Singh, who was involved in that whole story that got us onto the Canadian premise to begin with. And now we've come full circle all the way back around, and I guess I'm curious whether he, too, is Sikh in family origin. It doesn't tell me a great deal about him here on this page. But there you go. you could read about pirates all day, and in fact, we have almost done exactly that. So I'll get off the subject now, and you can all register your complaints with me afterwards via social media or via email, or tell me how much you enjoyed it. And we should become pirates here, and then we could probably steal a lot more donations than we're getting voluntarily. But, the lines are blurred. So you should take the time today, plunder your neighbors and offer them their lives in exchange for listening to and becoming hopelessly addicted to the Kagro in the Morning Show, so that they too can become Patreon sponsors, even if under duress. No one need know. No one need be any the wiser. Speaking of which, by the way, we do have a new sponsor who requires, he doesn't actually require it, but we offer it freely of our own free will, and happily so. Welcoming Jake, just Jake, for now, to the ranks of the Patreon sponsors, joining us on September 14th, just a few days ago, but we've been remiss in calling the name out and thanking him for joining us on Patreon. Thank you very much, Jake, and welcome. Hope it doesn't drive you away that we wanted to talk about pirates today. All right, couple minutes remaining. We'll stick to the superficial, stupid, and still somewhat interesting stories that are still before us. Let's see. First of all, I am happy to read you this fun story from the Hollywood Reporter. I was pleased to read this story just yesterday, that Larry David of television fame confronted Elon Musk of worldwide infamy over his support for Republicans after the Uvalde shooting. I guess it's an older story, but just making the press now, and asking him point blank, do you just want to murder kids? Is that why you still support Republicans? He's oversimplifying things a little bit, but in ways that Republicans and people like Elon Musk do all the time. So turnabout is fair play, I guess, here. What really intrigued me about this was, of course, Larry David has a tremendous talent for either creating situations or creating just stories about situations in which the protagonists make me profoundly uncomfortable to watch. I mean, that's the style of his show, and what all Curb Your Enthusiasm was all about. And I always wondered, it bothered me. Like, this is so unrealistic. Nobody would ever do this. This is crazy. You'd have to be a total lunatic to do these things. But maybe Larry David really does do these things, and it's semi-autobiographical, even if it's sometimes exaggerated. But I'm very pleased to note that there's a practical, real-life application of his interest in making everybody wildly uncomfortable, and it all happened at Elon Musk's expense, so it's all been worth it. The Curb Your Enthusiasm star, it says here in the subheader, approached the tech mogul at Ari Emanuel's wedding, according to Walter Isaacson's new biography of Elon Musk, and I guess that's how the story emerged, as all stories about Elon Musk are emerging these days. So somebody's read that passage. Very interesting. Larry David confronted Elon Musk over his support for the Republican Party at Endeavor chief Ari Emanuel's wedding last year, according to Isaacson, and just confronted him saying, do you just want to murder kids in schools? The comedian and Seinfeld co-creator reportedly asked Musk at the Hollywood super agent's nuptials to fashion designer Sarah Staudinger in France. Wow, what a to do, huh? No, I'm anti-kid murder, thankfully, I guess. Musk is said to have replied, well, then how could you vote Republican? David followed up. Good question. David, an Emanuel client who officiated the nuptials between the talent agent and Staudinger, that's pretty amazing, confirmed the confrontation to Isaacson, saying his tweets about voting Republican because Democrats were the party of division and hate were sticking in my craw. Even if Uvalde never happened, I probably would have brought it up because I was angry and offended. David was seated at a table that included Musk, Isaacson added, so they were sitting together at the table. He couldn't get away from him. And the Curb Your Enthusiasm star seemed to be fuming as he took Musk to task, and he wasn't about to get chucked out either. He's not only a star client, he's the celebrant of the wedding. That is pretty amazing. The book notes that MSNBC Morning Joe co-anchor Joe Scarborough, another wedding guest, had been told by David of the confrontation, and Scarborough found it all pretty amusing, Isaacson wrote. The Elon Musk biography is, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. It's a big deal these days. I don't need to tell you about how it's doing. That doesn't matter, and you all know that it's the subject of much conversation all around all political circles today. So anyway, I was just glad that Larry David was using his powers for good and not evil for once, even though I enjoy the show. Both Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, even though it makes me physically uncomfortable to watch. But I think he would actually take that as a compliment about his writing style and I guess production and directorial style as well. So, okay, that's it. We'll wrap up and get the hell out of Justice Putnam's way so that he can tell you stories that are relevant to today as opposed to the golden age of piracy or even further back. I'm just astonished that we haven't heard as much about Peter Easton as we ever did about Blackbeard. But what do we ever really hear about Blackbeard? He was a pirate and he was really terrible and something. And it's not like they're delving extensively into his personal biography or anything. All right, I had another story that would have been a good waste of time too, but we'll waste your time with that one tomorrow. But I'm sure we'll get back to the politics of things as well. Just wanted to indulge the pirate theme today and the Canadian theme to the extent that there was any Canadian content there. But remember, there are two genuinely Canadian pirates out there. So you can, by all means, look them up. Remember, Joseph Baker and Edward Jordan, both operating in the late 17 to early 1800s, in case you wanted to look them up. I don't think we're going to return to the subject, but maybe next year's Talk Like a Pirate Day will be our opportunity for that. In the meantime, Justice Putnam brings you his Smothered Benedict Wednesdays version of the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next. On the Senate floor, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse dressed down the corruption of the Federalist Society Supreme Court and the very possible illegal conduct of the billionaires funding their lavish lifestyles. We began that story yesterday. Maybe we need to return to that tomorrow.
Networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Elsewhere, a Republican book banning bill in Texas has been blocked by a Trump-appointed conservative judge. On the same day, a Texas middle school teacher was fired for reading The Diary of Anne Frank to her class. But you know they hate that book. She was tempting fate, if you ask me. And, of course, we're thankful for his collection of stories from around the country and around the world. Stay tuned. Next.